Brilliant. Well, thank you all for coming on and the introductions off camera. We're here today to kind of look at discussing the links between finance, data, and operations, and how I guess organizations can utilize each three areas to kind of get either see improved performance or drive towards excellence, or potentially what data they are looking at, but maybe they need to start looking at something else. So I guess a good place to start, and I think obviously we'll start with Michael, is talking about finance, data, and operations. What does the links mean to you, and what does that look like in your opinion?
Okay, so I'm a chartered accountant, so I guess start with finance. But I think a great finance team should positively impact operations. So it's not just a reporting function, and it's not just a financial data storage function, but it should also guide, inform, and support the strategic and operational decision making. Now, it can't do that without great data in and the ability to analyze, process, and discuss the data. So increasingly what we're doing with our finance team, as well as automating the data capture, is we're trying to automate some of the data analysis and then upskill on the ability for the team to actually have that human ability to discuss and analyze the data and to be able to see ways that that can change and make positive changes in the business. So what that we have data coming out of our ears, and that's I think been the case for the last 10 years. We're now in a position where we can actually use it effectively. Within social care, with the move to electronic care plans and electronic medication and all the other Internet of Things that we now have across our estates, this now means that we have even more data, and so we now need to have not just an operational team or a finance team, but I think increasingly a data team to be more proactive with planning care and being more insightful when we're being reactive about with the data that we have. And so I don't think it's I think it's increasingly the case, and maybe this is just me and my perspective on things, but I don't think we necessarily have a finance team. We have a data team that deals with finance data. And I think we also, and we, certainly within our company, we have a data team that deals with care data. And I think how we look at the information that we have and how we analyze it and use it is something that is gradually changing across multiple sectors, but certainly in social care with the advent of this electronic Internet of Things that we all now live in.
Okay, amazing. And in terms of, if we go to Alison, obviously you're also an FD of a small group. Is there any comparisons with how you're looking to do things in in the business that you work for?
Yeah, working for a small business obviously looks at data in a different way to large businesses, because when you work for a corporate operator, the people who are making the strategic decisions are so far removed from what's going on day to day in each of the facilities. Whereas when it's small, that's different. Everything's sort of impregnated and close, and it can be quick and reactive. So now it's getting used to sort of having that data, but actually not having, in large companies, when you can have teams that are looking at that data and interpreting it. When you're small and you don't have as many sort of in the team, it's about working more efficiently. You have to, otherwise you're never going to get anything done. You just spend all your time reviewing the data. What does it actually mean? And let's get on and actually make that change. So it's about really cutting to the point of what is relevant data and what are we going to do with it? What does it actually mean? We can have, as Michael said, so much data is available these days. We assess and analyze everything. But in isolation, that is absolutely useless, because if you don't understand your business and you're not going to actually then make that change, to put it into action, what does it show? So actually, I'm finding there is these links between, as you say, the data, the finance and operations is much closer and swifter in a smaller business.
Yeah, no, for sure. And Dean, if we come to you in terms of where Alison and Michael have spoken about data, obviously someone like yourself who's worked in that space for a long time, what should people be potentially looking out for, or how to handle and collate data? What would be your kind of advice around that?
So I think what Michael and Alison said resonates with me is they obviously have a smaller set of services that they're looking after, and I guess they can impact that really quickly because we are going to look at X and this is what we're going to do with Y. I think currently where we are being a big corporate provider, everybody wants to have their say, and when everybody's having the say, obviously there's a lot of red tape that you need to cut through. And I think what I've noticed here especially is there's a lot of time spent doing the data. There's a lot of time, downloading it into spreadsheets and then, manually manipulating spreadsheets, then getting a figure and then sending that figure out. For me, that's not data analysis. That's just a churn of data comes in, you manipulate it, you get a figure, you send that figure out. I think the beauty that comes with data and what I'm really passionate about is actually sitting back and going, okay, so what does that figure give you? And what other data elements can we bring into that to give it more meaning? So, that could be something as simple as turnover. The amount of manual manipulation currently to get a turnover figure, of downloading spreadsheets, putting it into X, taking Y, adding that to get a yearly figure for turnover and then coming up with a percentage of 10%. Looking at that is meaningless unless you take a step back and go, okay, so what regions are giving us the highest turnover? Why are we getting a high turnover there? What other data sources can we bring in there? Can we bring in, is the turnover generated by people being dismissed through the HR case management system? Are we not just attracting the correct candidates into them roles? When you start to bring other data sources into one metric, then you can start to get a rich understanding of the insights that come out of that. And it's about, for me, I've done this for 12 years now, working for CQC. I understand what CQC as a regulator look at and what they bring in to write the reports. So I'm bringing that knowledge to this organisation, going, look, the figure's great, however we need to bring more insight into that and connect more data together. And that could be using tools like Power Automate, or going into the Power Query and creating processes to automate all of these manual manipulations. I think people are comfortable in Excel and they think Excel's the only way of doing things. I think people need to have the sort of desire to go out and try and understand the Microsoft Fabric community and what tools are there where, if you were doing something once, can you automate that so you don't have to do it, and release that time to then start to derive the insights from the data.
Yeah, for sure. In terms of, you mentioned about the tools, is there any tools that you would recommend or that you guys use at Voyage?
I'm Power Query, Power BI, as Michael knows. Them are the primary tools that I've been using. Is, I drive everything through Power Query, and then my visualization is in Power BI. I'm not one of them people who sees death to Excel. I think Excel has its has its place. I think, for fast, quick analysis, it's the place to go. But if you are, going out and you're doing something every week or every month, then I think you need to start to look at Power Query, Power BI, and automating these processes so you're not spending that time actually doing the manual manipulations.
Yeah, no, amazing, brilliant. Thanks for that. And then kind of looking with you, Harris, in terms of collating data, analyzing it, and then kind of looking at actioning it. How do you guys operate in your organization to kind of look at getting outcomes from the data that's been kind of analyzed?
I think one of the critical things is to understand what the data is actually for. And I've heard, all three sort of in their explanations of how it all connects mention this in one way or another. And so what I mean by that is, because we're small, but surely also in larger organizations where I have worked in the past, we need to be, and we are in our organization, very goal oriented. So what is the goal? What is the purpose of the organization? What are you trying to achieve? And then I because I sit in a slightly different position to everybody else, I'm all about actionable data. I don't really have a lot of time for just data. And I do find sometimes when I give somebody to do something, they come back with very beautiful data. And I feel really bad saying this is wonderful but useless. Because ultimately what you're trying to do when you are reporting back to senior management is helping them connect their goals, which is the company's goals, to actionable items that will help them achieve those goals. And where we are now with the ability to do those things very quickly, I think for me that is the main purpose of data. Data by itself means nothing. It's just, rubbish in, rubbish out. You can take Excel spreadsheets, put it in Power BI, automate everything. But if what you're asking of the software to deliver to you is nonsensical and not actionable, then, perhaps it's not as useful to undertake the exercise in the first place. So I always say, because I don't have the luxury of having lots of people, but I actually think that sometimes that's not such a bad thing. So, we have one person who is helping collate data from a finance perspective, from an operational perspective, from a care perspective, and then trying to bring all of that together. And then because it's one person, we kind of say, okay, we can't overload this person. So let's just really hone in on what are we trying to accomplish. So critical things are, is my revenue okay? Am I making the right revenue? Okay. Am I staffing my home correctly? Am I having too many safeguardings? Am I having too many falls? And, and you can layer on additional elements because you can break down, and I think Dean mentioned this, you can take more detail into each of these items. But the things that you really need to report on, in the old world, we used to call them KPIs, then they started getting called something else, and then something else and something else. But that was the concept of KPIs. It is, what are you trying to achieve? What is the goal? You can have 900 people working for you, collecting data, putting it in nice spreadsheets or making nice charts, or you can have Power BI or Tableau or what have you. But ultimately, the key question is, what is actionable and to what end? So our goal is to collate as little data as possible into one coherent report that allows me to get a snapshot of the business and identify key issues that need to be corrected immediately. The final point I'll make on this is, as an organization, what I'm spending my time, engaging with my team on is teaching them to be less reactive and more proactive. And so the goal for me is utilize data to make proactive decisions instead of reacting to things, which is when I find myself on the back foot. And I don't like being on the back foot.
Yeah, no, spot on. Brilliant. Thanks, Harris. And yeah, everything you guys said is spot on. And there's some really insightful things there for sure. If there's a new provider or a smaller provider looking to kind of move further into kind of data, looking to improve their operations and take their business forward, and that this isn't really their background, I'm not sure who's best to answer this, but where should someone start in terms of getting the process ready to kind of move forward?
At the risk of doing things in order, I'll go back to what Harris said, and that it's about for me, it's about the purpose of the data and the philosophy of care. We all work in social care, so the philosophy of care that you have. So if you have a service who, for example, in our organisation, we have a real focus on weights because we believe that food is really important, it's enjoyable, and it's a critical part of the day. So we really focus on weight loss and the amount that people eat, and we go into a lot of detail about that on a monthly basis with our managers. Now, other providers may not have that, call it a philosophical or strategic orientation. They may be much more focused on accidents, incidents, or behaviours that challenge, or other things. And Dean's organisation, which will deal with younger individuals, will have a different focus. So I think it's about the big picture to start off with. If you're new to data, as Harris said, what is the purpose of it? What outcomes do I want? What does good look like for my organisation? And then use the data to derive for that. So you've actually got to really understand what your purpose is in your overall strategy before you even start to think, well, what report should I pull together?
Yeah, no, amazing. No, that's really, insightful for those that are kind of looking to move into that space, and find out what their end goal is before, and then kind of reverse engineer. So no, that's really helpful. In terms of, I guess, you can have a finance manager or an operations manager or someone like Dean who manages data. If you're a slightly smaller organization that maybe doesn't have the required personnel to deliver on this, is there consultants out there that can support with this? Is there a gap in the market for these individuals within the social care sector? Or what's your maybe Alison might be able to help with this. Where do you see the personnel being able to operate this kind of connection between three areas?
Yeah, and I've had that role where I've been that external person and sort of given sort of consulting and support to small companies. But I think being a small operator, I think sometimes by the time you've brought that person in, they're very focused. Obviously, they're going to have clear, defined terms of what they're going to do, and they are potentially going to disturb the business by coming in and asking the questions while on their one focused project. When you're in a small business, sometimes you're fighting a lot of fires at once and you're wearing lots of hats. And sometimes it's easier just to do that job yourself. So I think it does depend on the size of the business. I think it depends on what you're requiring someone to do. So if they're coming in to implement a new system, that may be perfect to give to an external consultant to say, just make that, get that done, introduce that new system. So it could be, say, a care planning system. But otherwise, if it is just to analyse regular data, that isn't really going to be efficient to use somebody external because they're not going to know your business. Because I think what we've all said is actually having that data all we're really looking to report on is the things that aren't right. So if your occupancy looks like it's going in the right direction, we haven't got time to spend trying to talk about how great that is. There's time for rewarding and recognising success. But if something else, if your staff turnover has gone up, guess what? That's what we're going to have to talk about. And actually, we're going to have to give a quick fix. As we've all said, data's great, but without offering that solution, which is what you can do, particularly in a small business. And that's where people knowing that business knows what that solution is. So I think bringing somebody in that is going to just talk about the data is going to do exactly what Harris doesn't want, is to have a really great set of, a stack of data. What does it actually mean? Well, they're going to say, thank you very much, I've done my consulting role and off I go. So unless it's somebody that you're going to perhaps partner and collaborate with on a more regular basis, it could be somebody that you're always going to have for so many days in a month. There's obviously space for those partners, but not somebody that's going to come in and just do a short-term job, because by the time they've got an idea of your business, they're done and gone, and they're not really wedded to your business, are they? When you're in a small business, you've got to be really passionate about this. I've been passionate about every job I've ever done. In a small business, it's completely different. You've got to actually do everything in that business, or be prepared to. So actually, I like to broaden this. It's not just finance and data. We'll probably go on to talk about ops soon, but actually, I think finance underpins everything in that business.
Yeah, no, perfect. And I think that we'll come back to that a bit later on, where I know Michael's mentioned around his team kind of look at themselves as a data team, because I think that's an interesting concept that, like you said, you can get someone in that kind of gets all the data together but doesn't really share the vision, or doesn't have the end goals in mind. But I think having a collective team like Michael's team and Michael have developed, I think that allows you to get the data but also look at delivering the outcomes. So no, that's really, really interesting. In terms of, like you mentioned, Alison, and I think maybe we'll go to Harris for this one, around operations. We've spoken a bit about finance, a little bit about data, but in terms of operations, there's quite a broad topic, and there's lots of different elements that go into operations. But in terms of how you see operations and how your team works, Harris, what does that look like to you?
I think operations is sometimes a very broad term, that everything sort of that no one else wants to deal with gets swept under. So can I just go back to the first question, though, that you asked? Because I think, obviously, being a small provider myself and having set up the business myself, I have actually experienced the whole plethora of, digitization is the next thing and everything needs to be digital and there will be no paper in the future, and having to struggle with thinking about all of those things. So to any new provider who has already started in this business or is thinking about starting in the business, I will echo what Alison has said. You are going to be ultimately responsible. And if you are not prepared to read and learn this new stuff, then you best not get into it, because hiring external people is not going to solve the problem. They are there with a scope in mind, as they should be. They don't own the business. It is not ultimately their responsibility. You give them a brief, they deliver the brief. But to execute the brief will always end up on the plate of the person that owns the business, or people that they employ to do that on a full-time basis, right? A consultant will tell you, here's how you get from A to B. Here's the chart. Here's all the steps. They may even get hired for a little while to start doing those steps. But, how operations are going to connect to data, to finance, to X, Y, and Z, ultimately, you might as well hire them full-time, because that is a full-time gig and then some. So coming back to what you were saying, in our business, operations ultimately encompasses all of HR, all of legal, all of care, QA, all of that sort of falls under operations. And I think that the thing that ties all of that together isn't data, it's the goal. What is the mission of the business? And what Michael said earlier is a very interesting but important insight. Each business has a philosophy. Even though we are all doing elderly care or some type of care, and you would think we're all just there to provide care, we all have our own philosophies on how we do that, and he said this to me before as well, that they are very focused on weights, because weights drive a lot of different things for the individual that they're providing a service to. So we also focus on weights and falls, because that's sort of what the cohort of people that we provide our services to show us as being indicators of how they're going to quote unquote perform while they're living in our care. And so we want them to do well. And so operationally, that is the stuff that we are going to focus on. However, and I think this is something that Alison said, that data is only useful for as long as it's creating a problem. So somebody actually has to be sitting there watching everything and being able to highlight, oh, weights, we've done this. It's now embedded in, all the carers' minds that when people come in, we have to be very good about their nutrition and blah, 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 blah. And then you move on to the next thing. So it can't just be that you're measuring the same 6 things all of the time. The purpose of the data should be to help you get better at all of the things that you are supposed to be doing, but recognizing that you cannot fix everything at the same time. You need to allow time for those things to embed themselves, and we do that in different ways, and I'm sure everybody's got their strategies. But the data ultimately is just a driver of a proactive approach to management. And so, the goal is ultimately what creates the approach in management. Approach in management drives what data is needed, and the data comes from the software that we are using. So to a new entrant, the key is to find the right software that will allow interoperability between different softwares, so that you can then take it immediately from day to day to big picture. And we haven't talked about the tech side of things, but my biggest bugbear is when I get chased around by different software providers for different things. All of them are necessary. But then when I ask them, okay, can I connect your software and my workforce software? The answer is, yes, you can. And then when you look into it, the answer actually is, of course you can, but you need 7 days to make it happen. You need to download this CSV and put it in that, and then it'll get rinsed and it'll come out this way. And then, so that all actually makes it not very helpful. And so, we have to decide what our tech stack is going to be. And sometimes we will make choices where maybe the software we are choosing may not be the fanciest or may not be the nicest, UI or what have you, but has great APIs and allows us to connect it to the other software that we're using in our stack, which then allows a much better, more proactive dashboard. So that's the choice we will make at that point, but all of it boils down to what are the goals of the business. And then data is just an enabler, as is technology, as is every individual that is employed in the business. They're all enablers to help achieve the goal.
Yeah, amazing. And just a quick one on tech stack, because I think it's quite an interesting topic, especially those coming into the space or looking at actually becoming a bit more automated or digital, where I think you can get lost in tech stacks because there's a lot around you. Every day you'll probably have a few in-mails from someone telling you that this new tech stack's going to change your life and make everything a lot easier. Where's a good place to start for someone coming into the care space? I'm not too sure who's best to answer this one, but just to give people a bit of a guideline around where to and where not to kind of navigate.
I think it's what Harris touched on is it depends on what you want for your goals. I don't think any of us will sit here and say that our tech stacks are all exactly the same. I've got my personal preference on, I like to use Microsoft. So we have Dynamics, and I'm a big fan of Dynamics and everything that is within Dynamics. However, we do have a lot of other systems, but exactly like Harris said, is the systems don't talk to each other, and to take data out of one system, then how as an analyst do I connect all of that? Because at the end of the day, if we're talking about operations, an operations manager doesn't care how they get the figure, they just want the figure. So if I need to link 5 different applications up somehow to get a figure, that's what I need to do. The transformations that happen in the background, nobody really cares about. And that might take me days and days of stitching, an internal app together with a key of data that doesn't match Microsoft's key of data, trying to create one, stitching that together to just come up with one figure. The operations only care about that figure, and if that figure's wrong, then they will lose the confidence in the data, and then we'll just slowly go back to, well, I know if I download this into a spreadsheet and do a pivot table, that's the data, that data's correct. So I can sit here now and say, if you're starting out, go with Microsoft and build everything with Microsoft, because for me, they've paid around years. At my last job, the person before me was looking into Looker BI, and that was the up and coming hip BI platform to get. When I was looking like what should I go with, all I went with was Microsoft, the big company, and everything that Looker BI does, Microsoft can sort of do as well. And I would rather go with a big wholesale company than someone who's just starting out. And that's just my personal view. I guess everybody else on the call would have different views. I just don't think there's a right or wrong answer, just that it actually works for you as a company.
Yeah, no, spot on. And I think you're right. And sometimes, trial and tested beats the kind of new shiny toy that's being, shouted around social media. So no, that's really good. Thanks for that, Dean. In terms, just going back to we'll go to Michael. In terms of, you mentioned earlier that your kind of team is now looks to be a data team. What does that mean, and how did you get to those steps?
Not entirely deliberately, but in some respects very deliberately. So I think the first thing is our philosophy of how we run our business, in that we see our individual care homes as individual businesses, and the registered managers as being essentially the general manager for that business. So our finance function is almost an outsourced finance function. We're going to capture data, we're going to report on it, and although I as FD will provide some input in terms of wage increases, fee increases on an annual basis, it's almost a quasi-fractional FD role. I'm finance director for six separate limited companies with their own management and operational teams. I'm not finance director of a group, if that makes sense. So when you roll that forward, what it means is your finance team is much more about, we're going to collect data, we're going to provide it, and then the analysis and the sort of strategic insight of that is sort of outsourced from me to the managers, and it's done at quite a high level. Whereas the traditional model of a finance function is you'll have a financial controller and finance managers, and they will work much more closely with the operational teams, which we never have. How we've grown up. What it means is that the managers are responsible for their budgets, and they have a large amount of autonomy. Now, I know for a lot of larger organisations, that's not how they like to operate. They like to have a much more command and control structure and a more traditional structure. That's fine. What it's meant, though, is that our finance team now, because they're not doing so much reporting and analysis and strategy stuff, they have a lot more time to be looking after the data and doing the data analysis piece. And we've gone through a transitional period where we've moved from Sage into Microsoft Dynamics as an accounting software. And that's given us more time to really hone into actually what data do we have and how can we use it, and how does the data flow and how can we use it more effectively. So we're not talking about invoices or purchase orders or bank reconciliations. We are talking about lines of data on a regular basis. And I think that as a culture has just been built up over time, that our finance team just see themselves as data experts. It's just the data happens to be finance data, and they're accountancy trained, so they get it from that perspective. But it's not a problem at all for us to turn around and say, okay, well, here's some other data. Go and access it, use it, and make functional connections between the operational data and the finance data at a base level. Hairdressers. So all of our residents will benefit from access to a hairdresser. How do we know that they've been done? Well, that's in our electronic care management system. So the finance team have got to go in, find that data point, and go, okay, well, I'm now going to reconcile that back to the invoice and then invoice that cost out to the relatives. Our process. So it's you create a thought process like that. Part of it's through culture and part of it is through sheer necessity. But it's around just subtly reorientating, again, top level philosophy, so that data is at the core of our finance team, not finance. And so they actually have a much broader remit that I think they actually understand. But that's perhaps because we've been building it up over time, and they've got much more responsibility and ability to influence the business, just perhaps not in the top level strategic way, but certainly at an operational level. They're very influential in how we do things.
Okay, amazing. And in terms of developing this team to kind of run it in this capacity, Michael, is there any coaching or mentoring or training that has been provided, or is it just a natural kind of development in terms of the way the business has moved?
Well, I'm a qualified coach, business coach, as well as a football coach. So, yes, there is some coaching available. My hourly rate is available on request. I think the answer is that it goes to the leadership of the organisation, and again, what Harris and Alison have said. If at a top level you're willing to make this commitment and say, okay, actually, you know what, we're going to operate like this, then it's incumbent upon you as the leadership team to provide the leadership, the mentoring, the coaching, the teaching to your team to allow them to go and do that, and to support the whole piece. Because it's not just, okay, finance team, here's how we're going to do things. It's managers, deputies, admin, care staff, activities teams. Here's how things operate. And this is why, and this is how we do things. And yeah, I know that there's another way of doing it, but we're going to do it this way, and here's why, and here's the philosophy behind it. So there's a really interesting piece here actually around, and this is bringing coaching into it, but actually where leaders in organisations and where the skill set that they have. I don't think it's the old 80s model of command and control, shouting at people, getting things done is dead. We know that. The teaching model, or the go do this, and having sort of reams of regional managers or team managers and team leaders, I think is dying out as we move more online. It's never been a preferred process for me. I've always seen leadership as something that is bottom up. I use the model of an inverted pyramid. So, a business is an inverted pyramid. The leaders at the bottom trying to balance the whole thing and supporting the team. And it's it's the team on the ground who are driving the business, not the leaders. We're just here to support and manage and make everything work. So I think it's a good question. Is there coaching and leadership available for this? Yes, there is. It's from the incumbent leaders, and there is training for them to upskill themselves in that. Very much so.
Yeah. No, brilliant. Amazing. Thank you for that.
Can I just jump in there for 1 second?
Yeah,
John?
go on, Harris.
I think
do.
this is a crucial point that will tie together all of the things that we've been talking about. So ultimately, when we talk about goals and strategy and being more proactive versus reactive and all of these things, they are driven by having leadership through mentorship. And in our sector, either by default or by design, we have a structure where we have a registered manager that's getting registered with the regulator. But the regulator is also asking for a mentor, because when they ask you to register somebody else from the provider side, they call it a nominated individual or responsible person or what have you. But ultimately, that's the person whose job description includes mentorship of the registered manager. And that's why it's so crucial, because these businesses, and I'm going to echo something that Michael has just said, they are location-based businesses. So you cannot really, you can pretend that you can have a command control structure or a hub and spoke model, but the reality is that they control everything that is happening on the ground 24/7. You can visit the home, and I was actually having this chat with Michael a couple of weeks ago. How many times does everybody visit from head office in your organization? So I'm doing it twice or sometimes 3 times a month for each location. And I have some people in my operations team who can second and help me out, so it isn't that I'm traveling all the time. But that still does not get you even 20% of what is going on in the home. And so this devolvement, if that's a word, of responsibility back into the manager, and then empowering them, and then sitting back and being their mentor when they get into trouble, is actually the right way forward. And so when I was pushing and changing things, and we've grown by acquisition, so we've actually acquired other people's cultures and spent a lot of time working on adjusting that and putting it on our platform. I think the crucial thing that we have used, and I have learned over time by making mistakes, loads of them, is that forcing people to take on a new software almost immediately results in it failing completely. But actually bringing them on board by highlighting the benefits of having software and acknowledging that it is going to be a big shift and some of the carers will not like it, and then teaching them how to talk to the carers and do this little sales pitch effectively before bringing in the software is a much better way of ensuring that the quality of the data that you're getting from that software is high. Because otherwise, software is just bullshit in, bullshit out. It is pointless. What you need is people who are committed to putting information in there. And again, I'll pick an example that Michael just used. Hairdressing. In 2 of my care homes, I have noticed that they are not putting it into our care management software. But in 2 of them, the hairdresser is the same lady, travels between the 2, and she is so proud of what she is doing that she's requested that she get access to her tablet so she can put it in that she has done, Doris's hair, and actually write down what she did for Doris's hair, which is phenomenal. As a provider, I'd pay extra for that service, to be honest. Because our philosophy is, we are here to support life for these individuals. We're not here to keep them alive artificially. We are here to support them having the best life that they possibly can, given all the limitations that they encounter. right? And so somebody having a hairdressing appointment, you should see those ladies when they get their hair done. It's a very big deal. And so if it's a very big deal for my client, it's a very big deal for me, right? And so capturing that information is actually then going to come to me as the CEO, and I'm going to say, okay, we are doing very well here. This is great. I don't need to worry about these 2 care homes because they're really looking after their people, right? And then where I'm getting no recording, that's where I become proactive and I try and solve that. So all this to say, mentorship is critical, and it is the responsibility of a nominated individual to provide it.
Could I just echo what people have said? Is for me, when you were talking about like the 80s and what was happening, and you know, you will do this and it will be like that, I still think that exists in businesses, and the issue for me is people hold data as a weapon, and especially working for CQC and doing what I did at CQC, it was always seen as we would try and arm ourselves with data, and then when we would turn up on an inspection, it would be, you know, bombs being thrown at providers and going, this says this and this says that and that says that, and it was never the sort of mentorship of going, you know, if we're working this out, this is why we need the data and this is how we're working it out. And if you have them relationships with people and go, look, this is what we're trying to do, and you know, that could be, you know, talk about turnover, it could be, look, we're trying to work out the turnover of your staff to see that you're staffed safely and you have people who have been there for a long period of time. If you explain that and you're trying to explain what you're trying to get to, every hospital I went to were like, oh yeah, we've got that. But because we were asking for, you know, the number of leavers, the number of starters, the trusts just used to think we were getting that data, and then when a report was being written, we were coming up with our own calculations, which probably went against their calculations. But actually explaining that to them, they were like, oh yeah, got that, there's the data. I just think, you know, Harris talked about falls, especially in elderly care. Falls are going to happen, and it's naturally, is it a bad thing? Well, no, because it's elderly care, falls are going to happen. When it starts to become an issue is falls with harm. So are people falling and they're hurting themselves? And then you can then start to go, well, actually, you know, if we are, as businesses, accept that falls are going to happen, how many residents have we got? How many bed days are there? Like, what is the number of falls that we would deem acceptable? What is the number of falls that we would deem unacceptable? And then allowing operations to understand what we're trying to do, give them that data and say, look, we haven't got this data to hit you over the head with. We want to try and understand the business because we want to try and improve that. We want to try and improve the lives of the people we support so they're not hurting themselves. As a data person, like my primary job is sitting with data. Like, I can sit in my room for 4 months and not go out. I go and see services because I want to have that relationship of going, my work is leading to this. I don't understand data people who just sit and actually don't go into the services, or they go and, you know, I'm sat there having conversations and I'm like, you could be working for BT, you could be working for Sky. Like, it's just naturally you've got this job and there's no relationship between the people we support and what they're doing at a data level. I think getting out there, like Harris has said, and go and visiting services, you can go, oh, I've met this individual and I can see how my analysis is helping that individual, and it gives you a sense of pride. And I think it comes back to the consultancy that Alison was saying, is they're there because they're getting paid. They're not there because they care about the ultimate person we support. Once they've been paid, they're off. They don't care about anything else. Whereas you know, if you've got a dedicated data team, they're going out and actually making them connections, and then you start to be like, oh, I could put the hairdressing data in there because I see it, because I know it makes the people we support feel better that they've had a haircut. Obviously, I can't talk about having haircuts because I never have them. I don't know what it feels like. But like, if you can make that connection with data, then you'll come back and then you'll start to be like, oh, I can do this, I can do that. Like, I had a conversation with Michael a few weeks ago, and he was showing us what he was doing with his electronic care platform. And I've got type 1 diabetes. So as soon as he showed us that, I was like, oh, I bet I could make relationships now between feeding time and the actual blood glucose, which have been monitored by the people we support. And I can make that connection because I've got a personal connection with it. So I can see the blood glucose now of every person we support. I can see that it's actually, you know, it's not great. And now what I need to do is go, okay, so how do I action this? What's my action to say to somebody, we have got an alarming metric here. What can we do to improve that? Then how do we put a mechanism in place so if the regulator comes, we can say, we've took this data, we've noticed this, and then what we've done is we've done an action, and because of that action, this has happened, and this makes us, people talk about like what's a good day, I talk about what's an outstanding day, because if we can say we've impacted a person we support's life, and it's had this benefit, for me that's outstanding. And we can go to the regulator and go, well, there's other people giving you this information, because if they're not, this makes us outstanding.
No, spot on. Really, really insightful stuff there, Dean. Thank you very much for that. I think we'll look to wrap up in a moment or two. I think we've touched on different aspects of finance, data, operations. One thing that would be interesting to get your points of view. We'll come to Alison, but obviously for anyone else, feel free to jump in should you wish. Is there, obviously it's very important, the process, the data, between the data, the finance and the operations. Is there, and obviously you guys are very knowledgeable and skilled in what you do, but is there an overall skill shortage in the market? Is there a gap that allows companies to potentially get the right people in to kind of allow this to happen? Or where's your stance on kind of finding the right people for this?
I don't think there is a gap, but finding them is very difficult because everyone's got different job titles these days. Lots of people are experts in things that maybe they're not. So finding the right person, a lot of it comes, I think, perhaps when you get to a certain age and you've been around a while, it's people that you know, it's connections. Now, if you're starting out when you're young, what do you know? You have to make those mistakes to find those people. So no, I don't think there isn't a skill shortage, but it's tapping into that. You know, how do you find that? And things like, say, LinkedIn are great for searching. However, when you search one title, what does that actually mean? Does that actually give you the job that you need? Especially when there's, like I say, not just one type of job title for this now. You could spend your life sort of, you know, just searching. That's why it's great to partner with, and this is why sort of HR support hasn't gone away and won't go away, because they're the conduit to introduce you to people that can solve the problem. So no, definitely not a shortage of people. It's how you find them that's the problem.
Yeah, no, brilliant. And I think, yeah, being in recruitment myself, we see that more and more, where a lot of organisations have all the same role, but 3 or 4 or 5 different names for that particular role trying to actually locate these people. Yeah, I definitely can be a challenge for sure. But no, I think I'm happy with how that went. I think there's some really good takeaways for the sector, people coming into the sector. And thank you guys very much. Thank you, Alison, Michael, Dean and Harris. Really appreciate that. And thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
No worries. Cheers for that, guys.